$800 a month. That's what they offered me to keep the lights on at a company I'd kept alive for 22 years. My boss didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. He just slid the paper across the desk like he was passing me a napkin, and when I asked if that was the final number, he finally lifted his eyes and chuckled. Bookkeepers don't move the needle, pal. You count the money. You don't make it. I'm a numbers guy. Always have been. My name's not important to the story, but you can call me what everyone at Holloway Freight called me for 2 decades, the closer. Not because I sold anything, because at the end of every quarter, every fiscal year, every audit, I was the one who closed the books, balanced the impossible, and made the company look like it knew what it was doing. 58 years old. Started as a junior accounts clerk back when we still ran ledgers on paper, and worked my way up to corporate controller. I never wanted the corner office. I wanted the books to be clean and the trucks to keep rolling. That was enough for me. For a long time, that was enough. The man across the desk was the founder's son. Old man Holloway had built that trucking company from 3 rigs and a prayer, and when his health gave out 4 years back, the son stepped into the chair like he'd earned it. He had a business degree from somewhere expensive and a handshake he practiced in the mirror. He'd never ridden in one of our trucks, never stayed up until 4 in the morning during a fuel price spike trying to keep the routes profitable, never once sat across from a banker and talked us out of a covenant breach. But he had opinions. Lord, did he have opinions. And the loudest one was that overhead, meaning people like me, was killing his margins. I'd asked for a cost of living adjustment, not even a raise really, 8%, to bring me back in line with what controllers were making at comparable outfits, which I knew because I'd done the homework. Because doing the homework is the only thing I've ever been good at. I brought a folder. I always bring a folder. Inside, it was every number that mattered. The fuel hedging program I built that saved us north of 400 grand the year diesel went sideways. The receivables system that cut our collection cycle from 60 days to 31. The audit history clean enough to make our lender give us a rate nobody our size deserved. He didn't open the folder. Everybody thinks they're indispensable, he said, leaning back, lacing his fingers behind his head. You know what I've learned? Nobody is. You want more money? Go find somebody dumb enough to pay it. So I stopped asking. Here's what he didn't understand, what his expensive degree never taught him. A trucking company doesn't run on trucks. It runs on cash flow. It runs on the relationship between the money that goes out on Tuesday and the money that comes in on Friday, and the 400 small decisions in between that nobody sees and everybody depends on. I knew the rhythm of that cash like I knew my own pulse. I knew which customers paid late and how to nudge them. I knew which banks would float us through a bad month and what they'd want in return. I knew, down to the dollar, how thin the ice was under that whole operation, because I was the one who'd been skating across it every single day for 22 years, and I knew something else. Something the son had never bothered to ask about. The company's main line of credit, the one that funded payroll, the one that bought fuel, the one that kept 140 drivers employed, was up for renewal in March. I'd personally negotiated that facility 3 times over the years. The loan officer, a careful woman who'd been at the regional bank longer than I'd been at Holloway, trusted exactly one person at our company, me. Every renewal, every covenant waiver, every time we'd needed a little grace, it was my signature she looked for, my voice on the phone she believed. The son had met her exactly once, at a Christmas lunch, where he'd talked over her for 40 minutes about his golf handicap. I went home that night and sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. My wife saw my face through the kitchen window and met me at the door. We've been married 31 years. She doesn't need a folder to read me. I told her what he'd said, counting the money, not making it. And she got quiet in that way she gets when she's deciding whether to be angry on my behalf or careful for my sake. You've talked about leaving for years, she said finally. You never do. She was right. I never did. Loyalty's a funny thing. It feels like a virtue right up until you realize you've been carrying it alone, that the other side stopped holding their end so long ago, they forgot it was ever a deal. I'd told myself old man Holloway was different, that he'd valued me, and maybe he had. But he was in a memory care facility now, didn't know what day it was, and his son had inherited the company and apparently nothing else. I want to be honest about why I waited so long, because people always ask. It wasn't stupidity. We'd put 2 kids through college on my salary. My daughter had a wedding I promised to pay for. I was 4 years from a pension that vested at 62, and you don't walk away from 22 years of compounding when you've got that close. Every year I told myself 1 more year. The math of staying always beat the math of leaving. Until the day he laughed, and the math changed, because some numbers you can't put on a spreadsheet. There was a competitor. There's always a competitor. Meridian Logistics ran the same corridors we did, out of a yard 40 minutes east, and their chief financial officer had taken me to lunch maybe 6 times over the past decade, always with the same soft pitch. They were bigger, better capitalized, and they'd been trying to professionalize their back office for years. The last time we'd talked, 8 months ago, she'd said something I hadn't been able to shake. "We don't need someone who can keep the books," she'd told me. "We've got those. We need someone who understands money the way you do. There's a difference, and most people in your chair never figure it out." I called her the next morning from a gas station parking lot because I didn't trust the privacy of my own office anymore. She picked up on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd finally get tired of being underappreciated," she said. "How's Thursday?" We met for dinner at a steakhouse, the kind of place where the prices aren't on the menu. I'd worn my good jacket. She didn't waste time. By the time the entrees came, she'd laid out a number that made my 8% request look like a rounding error. A base salary nearly double what I made. A real title. A seat at the table where decisions got made instead of just recorded. Vice President of Finance. Reporting to the CEO. Equity after year 1. But it wasn't the money that got me. I'm being straight with you. It was when she pulled out a printout of Holloway's publicly filed numbers, the ones every company has to disclose, and walked me through them, pointing at the margins, the leverage ratios, the working capital trends. And she said, "Somebody in that building is a genius and somebody is an idiot. And I've been trying to figure out for years which one's in charge." And I realized she'd seen me. She'd seen the work. The sun looked at me every day and saw overhead. This woman looked at a piece of paper and saw a person. I didn't say yes that night. I told her I needed 2 weeks, and I meant it because I had something to do first and I needed to do it right. The thing I want you to understand is that I didn't burn anything down. I want to be clear about that because the way it ended, people assume I must have sabotaged something, planted a bomb in the system on my way out. I didn't. I'm an accountant. My entire profession is built on the idea that the numbers don't lie, and I wasn't about to start lying with mine on the way to the door. Everything that happened to Holloway after I left, Holloway did to itself, years before I ever picked up that phone. I just stopped being the thing that hit it. For 2 weeks, I did my job exactly the way I'd always done it. I closed the month. I ran the reports. I sat across from the son in our Monday meetings and listened to him talk about a fleet expansion he wanted to finance. New trucks, new routes, growth. All of it leveraged on the assumption that our credit line would renew in March the way it always had. I didn't tell him it wouldn't. He never asked. I documented everything, but not because I was building a weapon. I documented it because I'd spent my whole career documenting things and because I knew that the day after I left, someone was going to come looking for the keys to a machine that nobody else knew how to operate. I wrote it all down. Every recurring payment, every bank contact, every quiet arrangement I'd built over 2 decades to keep the cash flowing. I left it in a binder on my desk, labeled and indexed. A parting gift more generous than they deserved. I'm told they couldn't make sense of half of it. You can write down what you do. You can't write down 22 years of knowing why. The hardest part wasn't the sun. It was the drivers. It was the dispatch crew who'd brought me coffee every morning for 15 years and the dock guys who called me by a nickname I won't repeat in polite company, and the woman in payroll who'd named her son after Old Man Holloway. These were my people. They had mortgages and kids and bad knees, and they'd shown up every day to move freight for a company that, I was starting to understand, was being run straight into a wall by a man who didn't know what a wall was. I couldn't tell them, What would I even say? That the foundation was rotten? That the only thing holding it up was about to walk out the door? They'd have thought I was bitter. Maybe I was. But I was also right. And being right about something like that doesn't feel like winning. It feels like watching weather come in. On a Friday, I handed in my resignation. The son barely reacted. 2 weeks, he said, glancing at the letter. Where you headed, a competitor? He smirked when he said it, like the idea of anyone fighting over me was funny. Meridian, I said. The smirk held for about a second and a half, and then it didn't. I watched it go. I watched him do the math. Meridian, our competitor, my position, the timing, and I watched him not be able to finish the equation because he didn't have the variables. He didn't know what I knew about March. He didn't know that the woman at the bank had already mentioned, casually, the last time we spoke, that she was retiring in February and that her replacement would want to take a fresh look at the relationship. He didn't know that a fresh look at Holloway's relationship, without me in the room to translate, was the most dangerous thing that could possibly happen to that company. We'll talk retention, he said suddenly. Maybe there's room on that adjustment. There was room 2 weeks ago, I said, and I stood up and I left his office, and that was the last real conversation we ever had. My first day at Meridian felt like stepping out of a cramped room into open air. They gave me an actual office with a window, a team of 4 sharp young analysts, and a CEO who said, in our first meeting, "Tell me what you see. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear." Nobody had ever asked me that. At Holloway, my entire job had been telling people what they wanted to hear in a way that was technically true. Here, they wanted the real thing, so I gave it to them. Within 6 weeks, I'd restructured Meridian's fuel program along the lines of the one I'd built years before, and we locked in pricing right before a market spike that ate 3 of our competitors alive. I rebuilt their receivables process. I sat down with their lenders, real conversations, the kind I was good at, and renegotiated terms that freed up enough working capital to fund an expansion they'd been putting off for 2 years. The CFO who'd recruited me started introducing me in meetings as the best hire I've made in 15 years, and I won't pretend it didn't mean something to a man who'd spent 2 decades being called overhead. March came. I knew it would. I heard about it secondhand, at first. Then in the trade press, then from a former colleague who called me one night just to talk because he didn't know who else to tell. Holloway's credit line didn't renew. The new loan officer, exactly as I'd feared, took a fresh look at a balance sheet she didn't understand, presented by a man who couldn't explain it, and she didn't like what she saw. The covenanters the son had been quietly tripping for months. The ones I used to paper over with a phone call and a forecast were suddenly visible to someone who had no reason to extend grace. The bank called the lime, and a trucking company that runs on cash flow when the cash flow stops too. They couldn't make payroll on the 15th. Then, they couldn't buy fuel. Trucks sat in the yard with freight on them and nowhere to go. The son scrambled. I heard he begged 3 other banks, flew somewhere to meet an investor, even reached out to a couple of the customers I'd spent years keeping happy, customers who were already by then getting calls from Meridian's sales team because Meridian suddenly had the capacity and the financial stability to take on more freight. I'd love to tell you that part was an accident. It wasn't sabotage either, exactly. It was just that I knew which of Holloway's customers were unhappy, and I knew Meridian could serve them better, and I'd have been bad at my new job if I'd pretended otherwise. The son called me. Of course he did. 4 times in 2 days, and then a voicemail, his voice stripped of every ounce of that practiced confidence. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about your value to us," he said. "We're prepared to discuss a consulting arrangement. Generous terms. Please call me back. My value to them." I sat in my car in the Meridian parking lot, windows now, a view of a yard full of trucks that were moving. And I listened to that message twice. Then I deleted it. I didn't call back. Not out of spite, though I won't pretend there wasn't some of that. I didn't call back because there was nothing I could do. He thought I had a magic trick, some lever I could pull to make the money come back. There was no trick. There never had been. There'd just been a man who understood the machine, and he'd laughed that man out of the building. And now the machine was broken and the warranty had walked across town. Here's the part that surprised me. The part I didn't plan and didn't see coming. About 6 weeks after the collapse, when it was clear Holloway wasn't recovering, I went to the CEO at Meridian and I asked him for something. Not for me. Holloway was laying people off by the dozen. The dispatch crew, the dock guys, the woman in payroll with the kid named after the old man. Good people, my people, about to lose everything because of a fool who'd inherited a company he didn't deserve. I asked Meridian to hire them. I told the CEO straight, these are the best operations people in the corridor. They're about to hit the street through no fault of their own, and if we move fast, we can have the cream of Holloway's workforce before anybody else figures out they're available. I dressed it up as strategy because that's how you get a yes in a business meeting, but he saw through it, and to his credit, he didn't care. Make a list, he said, bring them in. We hired 31 of them over the next 2 months. The dispatch lead, 11 drivers, the payroll woman who cried in my office and then apologized for crying and then cried again. I gave the dock crew their nickname for me back as a kind of password, and the first morning they showed up at the Meridian yard. One of them set a cup of coffee on my desk without a word, the exact way he had for 15 years, and I had to turn and look out my window for a minute. Holloway filed for bankruptcy that summer. The son, I heard, took a position at a consulting firm, the kind of place that pays people to have opinions about businesses they've never run. Old man Holloway passed away in the fall, and I went to the funeral, and I stood in the back, and I didn't say anything to the son, who didn't recognize me anyway, or pretended not to. I wasn't there for him. I was there because the old man had given a paper ledger clerk a chance 40 years ago, and whatever his son had become, that debt was real, and I pay my debts. It's the one thing I've always been good at, settling accounts. I'm 60 now. I've got my window and my team and a title that took me 22 years and 1 phone call to earn. The pension I walked away from still stings a little on the cold mornings, but Meridian's equity made that math work out better than the spreadsheet ever promised. The drivers still call me by the nickname. The payroll woman sends me a photo every year on her son's birthday. People ask me, the younger ones especially, when you're supposed to stop being loyal and start being smart. I tell them loyalty isn't the mistake. The mistake is being loyal to people who think your loyalty is free. The day someone laughs at you for asking to be valued, believe them. That laugh is the truest thing they'll ever tell you. I waited 22 years to hear it clearly. Don't wait that long. Count what you're worth, write it down where you can see it, and the first time somebody tells you that you don't move the needle, go be the needle somewhere they know how to use it. For 22 years, I told myself that keeping my head down was the responsible thing to do. Looking back now from this office with the window and the view of trucks that actually move, I can see how that quiet patience turned into something closer to cowardice dressed up as duty. The son laughed at me because he genuinely believed I was furniture. And the truth I had to face is that I'd let him believe it. I taught a whole company to treat my work like air-free, invisible, always there. You can't blame a man for not valuing what you've spent 2 decades insisting costs nothing. Everything that fell apart at Holloway fell apart along a perfectly straight line. The credit line didn't collapse because I left. It collapsed because for years it had been held up by one person's relationships and one person's understanding, and the man in charge never once asked who that person was or what would happen if he laughed him out the door. Cause and effect. He treated knowledge as overhead, so when the knowledge walked out, the overhead turned out to be the load-bearing wall. There was no curse in it, no luck. Just arithmetic finally coming due. What saved me wasn't anger. Anger is loud and stupid, and it would have had me storming out years ago with nothing to land on. What saved me was that I'd kept learning the whole time, learning the banks, the cash, the rhythm of money the way a mechanic learns an engine by ear. That patient sharpening is the thing nobody can take from you. They can underpay it, mock it, ignore it on a Monday. They cannot reach into your head and remove it. When the moment came, I wasn't betting on rage. I was betting on 22 years of knowing exactly what I was worth, down to the dollar, because I'd written it down. And here's the part I'm proudest of. The part that lets me sleep. When Holloway started cutting people loose, I didn't stand back and enjoy it. The dispatch lead, the drivers, the payroll woman who named her boy after the old man they hadn't laughed at me. They brought me coffee, so I went and fought to bring 31 of them across town to safety. You can win and still do right by the people who never wronged you. In fact, that's the only kind of winning that's worth keeping. If you're sitting where I sat, waiting another year and then another, hear me. Do the hard work of becoming genuinely good at something real, so good that your value is a fact and not an opinion. Hold to your principles even when walking away is easier, especially toward the people below you who have no power to repay you. And find the steel to act the first time someone shows you, plainly, that your loyalty is something they expect for free. That laugh is the most honest thing he ever said to me. It took me 22 years to listen. Don't take that long. Count what you're worth, and then go where they know how to use it.